3 weeks and a day until the midterms already, and a surge in voter enthusiasm is fueling hopes for both Democrats and Republicans, depending on where. How much of that enthusiasm in House races driven by a key voting bloc that could tip the scales in critical battlegrounds if they turn out? A new Washington Post ABC News poll showing a newly energized voter base across the board compared to only 4 years ago, with a major spike among younger adults, non-white voters, and those who say they favor Democrats for the House. But there are also recent signs in other polls that tight Senate races may be slipping away from the Democrats, chilling their hopes of gaining control of the Senate. Joining me now, NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray and Lisa Lerer, New York Times political reporter. Welcome both. Mark, first to you, the big picture, the polling picture. Is it becoming too much conventional wisdom to say the House most likely going Democratic, the Senate now almost safely Republican because of post-Kavanaugh changes, or is that overstating it?
No, it's not overstating it, Andrea, and I think that's a smart assumption, although worth noting that within 3 weeks, so much can end up changing as far as who has the balance, and some of these polls can move just a little bit, and that might actually end up putting the Senate more in play for Democrats right now. But, Andrea, as you mentioned, enthusiasm is so key this midterm cycle, particularly because there are fewer people who end up voting in midterm elections, and so the side that's actually more fired up, more enthusiastic, often ends up winning. In past midterm cycles, in 2006, the shellacking that Republicans took, in 2010 and 2014, the shellackings that Democrats ended up taking, it was because one side was really fired up and one other side wasn't. But what we're seeing in a lot of polls is that Dems are more enthusiastic, but Republicans have been catching up. And so this might be a midterm cycle that is different from what we saw in 2006, 2010, and 2014.
And Lisa, you've been out on the trail. You've been going to the rallies, talking to people. I think you were in Iowa. Am I right about that?
Michigan.
In Michigan, okay.
Close, you know.
Close. You were in a state that Donald Trump won famously because, if not for Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, he might not be president. In fact,
right.
He wouldn't be president.
Right, of course. And what I wanted to see was what Kavanaugh was doing for Democrats. We knew there was a lot of data showing that was closing the gap, as Mark pointed out, in enthusiasm between Republicans and Democrats. It seemed impossible to me that Democrats could be more motivated to vote. But I was wrong. Certainly,
it's that high.
It's very high, especially among women. We know there's a historic gender gap in these midterms, and you just see one female activist, Democratic activist, and outside in the Detroit suburbs told me they are supersonic charged up. So, you know, that's a reversal of what we've seen the past few cycles, where traditionally Republicans have been the ones that have turned out for midterms. The question here is whether Democrats are really going to flip that, and if they do, is it enough? It feels like it could be enough in a lot of these suburban House districts, particularly given the gender gap. It's not clear that it will be in the Senate, and right now it looks like it won't be.
And Mark, what about millennials? Because there's been such a drop-off in actually voting from intention to vote among younger people. We've seen it every cycle.
Yeah, Andrea, so historically, millennials and younger voters have always been the least enthusiastic, not only in midterm elections, but particularly true for midterm elections, but also in presidential ones. The concern for Democrats is that millennials now are such a big part of the Democratic base. You end up having the female voters, at least was just talking about African Americans, Latinos, and also young voters. But if one of those legs, young voters, isn't as fired up as the others, that could end up hurting Democrats. But one of the guidance that we've gotten from our pollsters of the NBC Wall Street Journal poll is that if Democrats are able to juice up millennial turnout, that actually the November midterm elections could even be better for Democrats than they've been hoping for. So I think you're exactly right that watching the millennial vote and seeing how these young voters turn out is going to be one of the keys to the puzzle in November.
And I wanted to talk about Elizabeth Warren, possible 2020 player. Obviously, she's got a very easy re-elect on the Senate side this time, at least as far as we understand in Massachusetts. Here, Donald Trump being asked today about what the Boston Globe revealed, which is that Elizabeth Warren has the results of a DNA test that she took at his challenge about whether or not she has Native American ancestry. This is Trump today.
Senator Elizabeth Warren releasing the results of her DNA test?
No, I have no. Who cares?
Mr. President, you said you paid $1 million to share.
I didn't say that. You better read it again.
Well, we'd have to dig that tape up, but Warren has tweeted, by the way, real Donald Trump, remember saying on July 5th that you'd give $1 million to a charity of my choice if my DNA showed Native American ancestry. I remember, and here's the verdict. Please send the check to the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. Lisa, calling his bluff?
She's trying to. I mean, Senator Warren is someone who believes that taking it to the fight to President Trump is what Democrats need, and particularly what Democratic voters are going to want in 2020. And a lot of what we've seen her doing is sort of dealing with her stuff. She released a bunch of her tax returns. She had a story in the Boston Globe that her team participated in that had interviewed a lot of the people who hired her at Harvard and showed that her Native American ancestry wasn't a factor in that hiring. And now we have her taking this DNA test. So she's trying to sort of clear out her baggage a little bit before she possibly, we're all out of the prediction business now, jumps into the presidential race. I would assume a couple months, maybe even weeks after the midterms.
Lisa Lair, thank you, of the New York Times now, formerly of the AP, and Mark Murray, always of NBC, thank goodness. And
hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.